The entire internet is obsessively scrutinizing the wrong 24 hours of video footage. Since the 1st of February, the public focus has been entirely locked on the exact minute of 9:50 p.m. on January 31st. Armchair detectives have spent countless hours analyzing every shadow and every vehicle movement from that specific Friday night. But federal investigators have quietly and abruptly pivoted their entire data collection strategy in a completely different direction. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and Savannah Guthrie are now actively utilizing local media in Tucson to issue a desperate plea for surveillance footage from the late evening of January 11th. That is a full 3 weeks before the actual crime took place. Why would the highest levels of federal law enforcement completely ignore the immediate hours leading up to a violent abduction to aggressively chase digital artifacts from an arbitrary night in mid-January? This sudden timeline break shatters the foundational assumptions of the entire open-source investigation. It strongly indicates that authorities possess concrete, physical, or digital evidence of premeditated surveillance. They are not looking for a kidnapper in a panic. They are tracking a calculated predator who conducted a rehearsal. Welcome to Crime with John. If you want rigorous forensic facts instead of reckless internet fiction, hit the subscribe button as we dismantle the timeline of the Catalina Foothills abduction. The significance of the January 11th date cannot be overstated in the context of forensic victimology. When federal agents shift their temporal focus backward by 20 days, they are signaling that the event on January 31st was merely the execution phase of a much longer operational timeline. The public is looking at the crime itself, while the investigators are searching for the intelligence gathering phase. This disconnect between public perception and federal strategy highlights the profound danger of crowdsourced investigations. Millions of eyes are looking at the wrong day, while the actual digital trail of the perpetrator goes cold. The requested footage from January 11th is the key to unraveling the surveillance methodology of the suspect. Understanding this timeline shift is the only way to comprehend the true nature of the threat. We must abandon the theories surrounding the night of the disappearance and follow the evidence back to the origin point of the stalking phase. A highly equipped tactical approach deployed against an 84-year-old woman living a rigidly predictable lifestyle is a profound investigative anomaly. To understand the mechanics of this breach, we must first examine the environment and the routine of the target. Nancy Guthrie resided in a quiet home in the Catalina Foothills. Her daily patterns were established and unwavering. The schedule was so consistent that it became a vulnerability. On the evening of January 31st, her son-in-law Tommaso Cioni drove her home. He dropped her off at exactly 9:50 p.m. The established routine dictated that she would spend the next morning attending a virtual church service. There were no erratic movements. There were no high-risk behaviors. She was a solitary elderly woman enclosed in a secure residential neighborhood. Yet, the entity that targeted her did not arrive as an opportunistic burglar. Surveillance data, confirmed by federal authorities, reveals a suspect arriving with specific operational gear. The unknown male was wearing a mask and gloves. More importantly, the individual was equipped with a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack and a highly distinct gun holster. This level of preparation indicates a clear intent to control a human target, rather than quickly extract property. The juxtaposition of a vulnerable 84-year-old woman and a heavily armed operator carrying a 25-liter transport pack is chilling. It strips away the comfort of a random home invasion theory. A 25-liter pack is deliberately chosen for physical capacity. It is designed to carry restraints or chemical agents or other tools required for an extended physical abduction. The presence of the specialized gun holster further elevates the threat matrix. This was not a crime of opportunity driven by a sudden impulse. The suspect knew exactly who was inside the house and exactly what tools were required to execute the extraction. The predictable nature of the target was the primary weapon used against her. The stalker did not have to guess her movements. He merely had to observe the established schedule and select the optimal moment for the breach. The rigidity of the routine allowed the suspect to calculate the exact window of isolation. At 9:50 p.m., Tommaso Cioni drove his vehicle away from the residence. The sound of the engine faded into the distance. The neighborhood returned to complete silence. The house in the Catalina Foothills went completely dark. Everything appeared to be perfectly normal and routine. But just beyond the threshold in the cold night air, the infrared sensors of the Front door security camera began to register a distinct thermal shift, as a dark figure methodically closed the distance to the entrance. The isolation was absolute. The departure of the family member initiated the final countdown of the operation. The suspect had likely watched this exact sequence of events unfold on multiple previous nights. The routine was confirmed. The perimeter was clear. The target was alone. The false sense of security, provided by the quiet suburban environment, was about to be violently shattered by a calculated physical intrusion. The methodical approach, captured in the initial frames of the surveillance record, demonstrates a terrifying absence of hesitation. The predator moved with the confidence of someone who had thoroughly mapped the terrain. The darkness offered concealment, but the real advantage was the complete predictability of the victim inside the home. The trap had been meticulously set, and the final execution phase was now in motion. The transition from quiet observation to violent physical intrusion occurred in the overnight hours between January 31st and February 1st. The suspect did not simply walk up to the door. The approach was tactical and designed to immediately blind the primary security apparatus of the residence. The masked and armed individual reached the entrance and intentionally tampered with the front door surveillance camera. This specific physical action to disable the recording device is a critical behavioral indicator. It confirms that the suspect possessed prior knowledge of the security system architecture. The perpetrator knew the camera was there and knew exactly how to neutralize its field of view. This was a direct physical attack on the home security perimeter. Following this forced blinding of the electronic witness, the timeline enters a period of complete darkness. The precise events that unfolded inside the residence during those overnight hours remain unknown, but the immediate aftermath paints a grim forensic picture. When Sunday morning arrived, the rigid routine of the target finally broke. Nancy Guthrie failed to log in to her scheduled virtual church service. For a woman defined by her predictable habits, this single deviation was the immediate trigger for alarm. By the 1st of February, she was officially reported missing. The authorities descended upon the Catalina Foothills property and immediately identified the physical remnants of a violent struggle. Blood evidence was discovered directly at the entrance of the home. Subsequent forensic testing and laboratory analysis definitively confirmed that the DNA profile extracted from the bloodstains belonged exclusively to Nancy Guthrie. This physical evidence fundamentally altered the classification of the incident. It transitioned from a missing persons inquiry to a violent felony investigation. Blood at the threshold indicates that the target resisted. It suggests a kinetic physical altercation occurred precisely at the point of entry or exit. The presence of her confirmed DNA at the primary breach point contradicts any theory of a voluntary departure or a medically induced wandering event. She was taken by force. The discovery of the blood evidence, combined with the deliberate tampering of the camera system, initiated a massive law enforcement response. The scene was secured and the slow, methodical process of forensic processing began. But outside the police tape, a different kind of investigation was rapidly accelerating. The internet thrives on immediate answers and easily digestible narratives. When millions of people looked at the basic timeline of events, their collective attention immediately locked on to the most statistically common suspect in any domestic disappearance. They looked at the timeline. They saw that the son-in-law dropped her off at 9:50 p.m., and the crowd-sourced conclusion was swift and utterly devoid of forensic backing. The public discourse became entirely consumed by the last known person to see the victim alive. Rumors began to circulate with terrifying speed. The basic principles of criminal statistics were weaponized against a grieving family member. The physical evidence at the scene, the blood, the disabled camera, the armed suspect captured on the fragmented video was completely ignored by an online mob hungry for a familiar storyline. The internet demanded a simple domestic resolution. They wanted the husband or the son-in-law. They wanted a narrative that fit neatly into the established tropes of true crime entertainment. But the physical data collected by federal evidence response teams was pointing toward a vastly more complex and dangerous reality. The forensic reality was incompatible with the viral internet theories. The blood at the door and the tactical gear on the suspect required a level of operational sophistication that did not align with a spontaneous, familial conflict. The disconnect between the physical crime scene and the digital speculation created a massive investigative friction. While amateur sleuths dissected the character of the son-in-law, federal agents were cataloging the actual biological and digital markers left by the true perpetrator. The truth was not hiding in the family dynamic. It was hiding in the microscopic data left behind in the dark. The immense pressure of public opinion reached a critical mass. The digital witch hunt focused entirely on Tommaso Cioni, threatened to derail the actual investigative process. The sheer volume of baseless accusations created an environment of extreme hostility for the family. But on February 16th, the Pima County Sheriff took a definitive public stance that completely fractured the viral narrative. In an official statement, the sheriff explicitly and unequivocally cleared the entire Guthrie family of any involvement in the abduction. This was a massive structural blow to the primary theory driving the open-source investigation. It created what we must analyze as the ignored witness paradox. The internet had appointed their own suspect based entirely on proximity and statistical probability. But the actual investigators, armed with highly classified forensic data, completely dismissed the public consensus. The total exoneration of the family is a crucial pivot point in the narrative architecture of this case. If the last person to see her alive is forensically cleared, then the statistical comfort of a domestic crime vanishes entirely. The void left by the exonerated family member is terrifying. It means that an unknown, highly capable, and heavily armed individual successfully infiltrated a secure neighborhood and violently extracted an 84-year-old woman without triggering an immediate localized response. The public refusal to accept the exoneration highlights a deep systemic flaw in how society consumes true crime media. When the facts provided by federal authorities contradict the viral theories, the public often chooses the theory over the evidence. The insistence on blaming the family, despite official clearance, serves only to protect the actual predator. It provides the suspect with the ultimate camouflage. While millions of people direct their anger at an innocent man, the individual who wore the mask and carried the 25-liter pack remains, completely insulated from public scrutiny. This is the ultimate danger of ignoring the physical evidence in favor of an emotional narrative. The federal authorities did not clear the family based on intuition. They cleared them based on hard physical data that the public does not possess. They have the complete blood spatter analysis. They have the exact timeline of the camera tampering. And they have the full unreleased video of the suspect approaching the property. The exoneration proves that the forensic profile of the attacker is completely incompatible with the family members. So, who brought the gun holster to the Catalina Foothills? If it was not a domestic dispute, then what was the motive for targeting a solitary elderly woman with such extreme tactical precision? The answer to that question requires abandoning the house entirely. The key to identifying the phantom operator does not lie within the walls of the Guthrie residence or within the dynamics of her family. The actual investigative breakthrough requires looking exactly 2 miles away from the primary crime scene. The suspect was careful at the door, but he made a catastrophic physical error during the extraction phase. The evidence that will ultimately tear down his anonymity was not found where the blood was spilled. It was found discarded on the escape route. Make sure to hit the subscribe button to Crime with John as we follow the biological trail left by the kidnapper. The realization that a stranger executed this precise operation changes the entire psychological profile of the event. It introduces the terrifying concept of a targeted selection process. The perpetrator bypassed countless other homes and countless other potential victims. He moved through the darkness with a singular violent focus, the clearance of the family forces, us to confront the reality of a predator who calculates risk and reward with clinical detachment. The discarded physical evidence waiting 2 miles away is the only tether connecting this ghost back to the physical world. The focus must shift from the domestic to the forensic. The transition from the violated home to the desolate escape route marks the beginning of the true scientific pursuit. The noise of the internet fades away, leaving only the cold, hard reality of biological material left exposed to the elements. The hunt for the phantom is now a matter of cellular biology. The meticulous reconstruction of the suspect escape route yielded the most critical piece of physical evidence in the entire investigation. Law enforcement personnel conducting a grid search located a discarded glove exactly 2 miles away from the Catalina Foothills residence. Visual and material analysis strongly suggests that this item matches the specific type of gloves worn by the masked individual captured on the front door surveillance footage. A discarded glove is a forensic goldmine. It is an item worn directly against the skin, in a high-stress environment. The friction and perspiration generated during the execution of a violent felony virtually guarantee the transfer of epithelial cells to the interior fabric. The glove was immediately secured and transported to a federal laboratory for advanced biological processing. The forensic technicians successfully extracted a viable DNA profile from the material. This was the moment of absolute scientific certainty. The authorities finally possessed the unique biological blueprint of the individual who carried the Ozark. TrailPack. The extracted profile was immediately uploaded and run against the combined DNA index system. The CODIS database contains millions of genetic profiles from convicted offenders and unsolved crime scenes across the nation. A match in CODIS would provide an instant name and an immediate tactical target for apprehension teams. But the system returned a negative result. There was no match. The biological signature of the kidnapper did not exist in the National Criminal Registry. This negative result is a profound investigative data point. It indicates that the suspect has either never been arrested for a qualifying felony or has managed to operate entirely beneath the radar of law enforcement for his entire life. The failure of the CODIS system forced the federal investigators to deploy a much more complex and time-consuming scientific weapon. The FBI has officially shifted the biological investigation toward forensic genetic genealogy. This advanced technique bypasses the criminal databases entirely. Instead, the suspect DNA is uploaded to open source and commercial genetic databases used by the general public for ancestry research. The goal is not to find a direct match to the killer. The goal is to find his distant relatives. By identifying third or fourth cousins who share segments of DNA, the forensic genealogist can begin to build massive family trees backward through time to common ancestors, and then forward again to identify potential living suspects. This process is incredibly powerful, but it is agonizingly slow. It requires painstaking genealogical research, parsing through census records, marriage certificates, and obituaries to narrow down a specific family line to a single male individual residing in or traveling to the Tucson area. While the scientists construct the family tree, the physical investigation on the ground must continue. The glove provides the biological identity, but the motive remains a deeply disturbing variable. The extreme tactical preparation observed on the camera footage indicated a highly organized offender, but a new development has pushed the threat assessment to an even more severe level. Various national media outlets have reported the existence of alleged ransom notes connected to the disappearance. According to these reports, unknown individuals have sent communications demanding large sums of cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, in exchange for information regarding the location of the victim. It is imperative to state that federal authorities have not officially verified the authenticity of these communications. In high-profile investigations, opportunistic actors frequently attempt to insert themselves into the narrative for financial gain. However, if these alleged demands are authentic, they fundamentally alter the entire motive architecture of the crime. A demand for untraceable digital currency aligns perfectly with the tactical sophistication seen on the physical surveillance footage. It suggests that the abduction of an 84-year-old woman was not a crime of passion or a random act of violence. It suggests a highly coordinated financial extraction operation designed to leverage the immense public profile and financial resources of her daughter, Savannah Guthrie. The suspect did not want the elderly woman. He wanted the leverage she represented. This transforms the suspect from a localized threat into a highly rational and organized criminal enterprise. The intersection of advanced tactical gear, biological evidence, and alleged digital extortion creates a profile of an offender who is comfortable operating across multiple domains of criminal behavior. He is physically capable of breaching a home and digitally capable of demanding cryptocurrency. This dual threat capability makes the suspect exceptionally dangerous. He is a predator who understands both the physical mechanics of violence and the digital mechanics of anonymity. The physical trail ends at the discarded glove, but the digital trail is just beginning. The race between the forensic genealogists and the extortionists is now the central dynamic of the case. The criminal architecture of this abduction presents a terrifying dichotomy. On one side, you have a highly militarized physical infiltration. The equipment selection alone demonstrates a level of operational discipline rarely seen in domestic incidents. The tactical harness and the heavy-capacity transport bag indicate a perpetrator who treats a residential neighborhood like a hostile operational theater. This individual operated with a chilling economy of motion during the breach phase. Every physical action, from neutralizing the optical sensors to extracting the target, was executed with brutal efficiency. But the moment the physical operation concluded, a completely different and far more volatile phase of the crime began. The transition from physical violence to alleged digital extortion introduces a massive variable into the forensic equation. When unverified, communications demanding decentralized currency began surfacing through media channels. The psychological profile of the suspect fractured. A disciplined tactical operator does not typically engage in high-risk digital communication while actively holding a hostage. Extortion requires an entirely different skill set than physical abduction. It demands securing a holding location while simultaneously managing encrypted digital networks to negotiate a payout. This dual requirement often forces perpetrators to make fatal logistical errors. They have to move, they have to communicate, and every action creates a data point. The authorities are now hunting a suspect who is attempting to manage a physical hostage and a complex digital negotiation simultaneously. This is a staggering operational burden for a single individual. It suggests the possibility of a coordinated cell or an extremely arrogant lone actor. The complexity of the alleged ransom demands exposes the underlying motivation for the entire operation. The target was never chosen randomly. The selection was based entirely on the external leverage the victim provided. The suspect bypassed the internal value of the home and focused solely on the external value of the victim to a prominent national media figure. This is an asymmetrical threat model. The perpetrator utilizes physical vulnerability to attack an unapproachable digital and public entity. To execute an asymmetrical strike of this magnitude, the attacker cannot rely on chance. They cannot simply drive into an affluent neighborhood and hope to find a viable target. The operation requires extensive intelligence gathering. The suspect had to know the architectural layout of the residence. They had to know the exact placement and the specific technical capabilities of the perimeter security systems. Most importantly, they had to know the behavioral patterns of the target and the people closest to her. They needed a comprehensive schedule of arrivals and departures to identify the optimal window for the breach. Gathering this level of granular intelligence requires time and physical proximity. The perpetrator had to place themselves in the environment long before the actual attack commenced. They had to become a fixture in the background of the neighborhood. This intelligence gathering phase is the critical vulnerability in any premeditated operation. A tactical operator can control the environment for a few minutes during a breach, but they cannot control the environment for weeks while conducting surveillance. They leave traces. They trigger sensors. They establish digital footprints in the local cell towers. The realization that this attack required a prolonged reconnaissance phase completely dismantles the narrative of a sudden ghost appearing in the night. The phantom was not a ghost. He was a lurker. He spent days or perhaps weeks mapping the terrain and studying the vulnerabilities of the property. He observed the vehicle patterns. He noted the lighting schedules. He calculated the exact response times of the local security apparatus. And in doing so, he unknowingly exposed himself to a vast network of data collection points that he could not entirely control or neutralize. The perfect crime on a Friday night is always built upon a foundation of verifiable mistakes made in the weeks prior. The authorities recognized this fundamental flaw in the operational design. They knew the suspect had to be visible in the environment prior to the attack. They stopped looking at the culmination of the crime and began searching for its inception. This profound shift in investigative strategy leads directly to a massive revelation that completely recontextualizes the entire timeline of the investigation. If you want to understand how forensic science systematically dismantles a criminal master plan, make sure you are subscribed to Crime with John as we expose the fatal error of the unknown operator. The entire architecture of the public investigation collapses upon the revelation of a single date. The sudden and urgent demand for community assistance regarding a Tuesday in early January represents the most significant tactical pivot in the entire case. Federal agents are not guessing. They do not initiate public appeals for archival video data without concrete foundational intelligence. The focus on January 11th is not a random inquiry. It is a highly targeted surgical strike against the reconnaissance phase of the operation. This date is the absolute epicenter of the forensic timeline. It provides the definitive answer to the most perplexing anomaly of the entire investigation. It explains exactly why the highest levels of law enforcement immediately and decisively ignored the primary suspect designated by the court of public opinion. The internet mob was consumed by the events of late January. They obsessed over the final movements of the family members. But the federal agents possessed classified knowledge that rendered those final hours completely irrelevant to identifying the perpetrator. They knew the plot was already in motion weeks before the final drop-off occurred. The data from January 11th is the definitive proof of external premeditation. It confirms that an unknown entity was physically present in the Catalina Foothills, conducting active surveillance on the target. This was the scouting mission. This was the moment the predator mapped the perimeter and tested the defenses. The authorities likely possess a fragmented digital artifact from this specific day. It could be a partial license plate captured by an automated reader. It could be a fleeting image on a neighboring security system. Or it could be a localized cellular ping that places an anomalous device in the immediate vicinity of the residence. Whatever the specific data point may be, it is powerful enough to completely reorient the federal manhunt. The existence of this prior surveillance shatters the theory of a localized domestic conflict. A family member does not need to conduct a covert reconnaissance mission on their own relative 3 weeks prior to an incident. They already possess the intimate knowledge of the schedule and the layout. The necessity of a scouting phase points exclusively to an external actor. It points to a predator who is entirely unfamiliar with the target environment and must painstakingly acquire the necessary intelligence through physical observation. This is the timeline break that the public completely missed. The stalker was there on January 11th, observing the patterns. He watched the vehicles come and go. He noted the exact time the house went dark. He identified the location of the optical sensors. He gathered the critical intelligence required to execute the flawless breach that would occur weeks later. This prior presence is the ultimate tactical failure of the suspect. He believed he was invisible because he executed the final phase with precision, but he failed to realize that the environment was recording his preparatory movements. The request for footage from this specific date is a massive dragnet designed to capture the unmasked, unequipped suspect. On the night of the abduction, he was heavily concealed by tactical gear, but during a daytime scouting mission 3 weeks prior, he may have been entirely exposed. The federal authorities are searching for a mundane vehicle or a seemingly innocent pedestrian who had no legitimate reason to be in that specific residential enclave. They are looking for the ghost before he put on the mask. This revelation completely vindicates the exonerated family members. The immediate dismissal of the relatives by law enforcement was not an oversight. It was a calculated decision based on the undeniable proof of a prior stalking event committed by an unknown outsider. The authorities knew the family was innocent because they already had the digital footprint of the real predator. They just needed the missing pieces of the visual record to connect the digital shadow to a physical identity. The urgency of the appeal regarding January 11th indicates that the federal dragnet is closing in. The investigators have the biological blueprint from the discarded material on the escape route. They have the tactical profile from the night of the breach, and now they are zeroing in on the geographical coordinates of the surveillance phase. The walls are rapidly closing in on the unknown operator. The timeline has been successfully reverse-engineered. The focus is no longer on the aftermath of the violence. It is focused entirely on the genesis of the plot. The predator thought he controlled the timeline, but the digital memory of a quiet neighborhood is about to expose his most critical error. To stay updated on this rapidly evolving timeline break, make sure to subscribe to Crime with John as we continue to track the digital footprint of the Catalina Foothills stalker. The current state of the investigation represents a masterclass in disciplined forensic endurance. The federal authorities have successfully insulated their operational integrity from the chaotic noise of external speculation. They have refused to be baited into pursuing statistically convenient targets or engaging with the rampant misinformation generated by decentralized online communities. Instead, they have anchored their entire strategy to the unyielding reality of physical and digital evidence. The framework of this case is no longer built on theories. It is constructed entirely from verifiable data points. The biological material recovered along the secondary escape corridor is the ultimate anchor. It is an immutable piece of the suspect that cannot be debated or theorized away. The authorities possess the genetic code of the perpetrator. This is a profound tactical advantage that completely neutralizes the anonymity the suspect desperately sought to maintain. The ongoing process of advanced genetic genealogy is a slow but relentless mechanism of identification. It is not a question of if the ancestral line will be identified. It is merely a question of when the algorithms will finally isolate the specific branch of the family tree. Every passing hour allows the computational models to cross-reference millions of genetic markers moving steadily, closer to a definitive name. This invisible biological pursuit is the most terrifying reality for the fugitive. He cannot outrun his own cellular structure. He cannot erase his genetic history. The net is closing not through physical pursuit but through microscopic analysis. Simultaneously, the aggressive push for historical surveillance data is tightening the geographic perimeter. The identification of the preliminary stalking phase has provided investigators with a secondary avenue of attack. If the biological analysis requires extensive computational time, the digital analysis of the prior weeks may provide a rapid visual identification. The dual-track approach ensures that the suspect is under pressure from multiple forensic disciplines. He is being hunted through his DNA, and he is being hunted through his historical movements. The pressure on the unknown individual is immense. He must operate under the constant psychological strain of knowing that his genetic material is in federal custody and his prior movements are being actively reconstructed. The transition from a local police matter to a specialized federal operation has brought the full weight of national intelligence resources to bear on a single target. The localized rumors have been entirely eclipsed by a highly sophisticated scientific manhunt. Yet, despite the massive allocation of resources and the clarity of the physical evidence, a profound sense of unease permeates the entire narrative. The identity of the operator remains concealed behind a wall of data that has not yet been fully deciphered. The victim remains entirely unaccounted for. The potential existence of encrypted financial demands adds a layer of extreme volatility to an already dangerous situation. The authorities are fighting a war on two fronts. They are battling the complex science of ancestral genetics, and they are battling the encrypted networks of digital extortion. The resolution of this case will not come from a sudden confession or a lucky break. It will come from the methodical grinding gears of the federal justice system. It will come from a laboratory technician identifying a chromosomal match, or a digital analyst isolating a specific vehicle in a grainy archival video. The framework is set. The traps are armed. The biological and digital nets have been cast wide. The only remaining variable is time. The suspect is currently a ghost living on borrowed time. The physical evidence will eventually speak. The digital footprint will eventually align. The facade of the perfect tactical operation will inevitably crumble under the weight of microscopic reality. The standoff between a clinical predator and the entire apparatus of federal law enforcement is approaching a critical threshold. The quiet streets of the Catalina Foothills remain a stark reminder of the violence that can erupt from the shadows. The community is waiting for answers. The family is waiting for resolution. And the federal agents are quietly waiting for the science to catch up to the criminal. What this case teaches us about the rapid evolution of criminal investigations is a stark lesson in the severe limitations of traditional law enforcement databases. The failure of standard indexing systems to identify the recovered biological material demonstrates a critical gap in historical forensic methodology. Traditional systems rely entirely on prior criminal convictions to generate a match. If an offender has never been processed through the penal system, they remain completely invisible to standard queries. The deployment of advanced genealogical analysis represents a massive paradigm shift in how federal authorities hunt uncatalogued predators. This technology bypasses the requirement for a prior criminal record by weaponizing the open-source genetic data of the general population. It turns every distant relative into an unwitting informant. The biological anonymity of a first-time offender is no longer a guarantee of safety. This specific tactical shift is the new frontier of major case investigations. Furthermore, this specific incident provides a chilling case study regarding the immense danger of open-source online investigations. The immediate and visceral public condemnation of a cleared family member highlights a deeply flawed societal reliance on statistical probability over physical evidence. When decentralized internet communities attempt to solve complex crimes, they invariably default to the most accessible and sensational narratives. They aggressively ignore the microscopic realities of the crime scene in favor of dramatic domestic theories. This behavior actively obstructs justice. It generates massive amounts of operational noise that federal agencies must actively suppress. It traumatizes innocent individuals, and most dangerously, it provides the actual perpetrator with a massive smokescreen of public misdirection. The absolute reliance on rigorous forensic science is the only valid countermeasure against the chaotic and often highly destructive nature of crowdsourced vigilantism. The microscopic evidence has been permanently secured in federal laboratories. The investigative timeline has been completely fractured and reconstructed by specialized intelligence analysts. The purported protective anonymity of the unknown suspect is slowly being dismantled by the relentless algorithms of ancestral genetics. Yet, the single most critical question remains entirely unanswered by the authorities. What exact visual evidence did the federal dragnet capture from the residential surveillance networks on that quiet Tuesday in early January? Did a fragmented camera angle finally expose the human face behind the tactical mask? Until the authorities officially release the definitive findings from that specific date, the heavy shadow of an organized predator remains suspended over the Catalina Foothills. The physical extraction was flawless, but the digital preparation was remarkably sloppy. That single, catastrophic error in fundamental tradecraft will inevitably be the catalyst for his ultimate identification. The hunt is no longer local. It is a highly specialized scientific pursuit operating at the highest levels. We will continuously monitor every forensic development and every newly unsealed court document in this unprecedented investigation. Make sure hit the subscribe button to Crime with John, so you do not miss our next deep dive into the psychological profiling of complex extortion operations. The absolute truth is always hiding in the data.